This is Daniel Fink speaking. Hello, friends. Hope you are all doing well. Thank you for participating in last week's training session, and welcome to the second training session of this capacity building program on universal acceptance, organized by LACRALO and the Universal Acceptance Steering Group and the ICANN. I'm Daniel Fink, and today we have a very special session with my friend Champika as an instructor. He is going to talk about EAI configuration. Today we are going to see how we can adapt email address systems for universal acceptance. Thank you all for joining the Telegram group. I appreciate all your contributions and interactions. Champika today will speak in English, so if you want to listen to the presentation in English, you can call or you can connect to this website and just choose the channel of your preference, or you can ask for a dial-out. And I hope you have fun, and I also hope that you pose questions. And today we will also have some quiz questions on Champika's presentation, and I think that you are going to have fun here. This is our agenda. Today we are going to talk about email address internationalization configuration. Next week we will talk about Java. I think that this is an interesting topic to you all. And then we will talk about how to engage in universal acceptance activities, and we will have a few surprises for you. So now I would like to invite Sylvia Harlen-Leite to introduce our special speaker today, our guest speaker. Sylvia Harlen speaking. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Also, I would like to welcome Professor Champika Wiyayatunga from Australia, who will share his knowledge on universal acceptance with you all. As Daniel said, if you want to listen directly to Champika, or Champ, as friends call him, you should switch to the English channel. But those of you who are in the Spanish and Portuguese channels, you are not going to miss a single word, because we have the best team of interpreters that are part of ICANN, and they have been working with ICANN for many years, and they know a lot of what we are talking about. So welcome to you all. I know that we have some new participants. We have 170 registered participants, so we are very happy to see that. And this is a confirmation that it was a good idea to put together this course that was so much needed in our region. And we also need to thank Champika for his participation, because right now in Latin America and the Caribbean, we don't have experts who are so knowledgeable as Professor Champika. That is why we were able to organize all the logistics around this course. One of the goals of this course is to make sure that all participants can be part of LACRALO. The other day we said that LACRALO is a house of Internet users, but obviously today we are open to all technical people and whoever wants to participate and make the lives of end users easy. And perhaps in the future, you yourself can also teach part of this knowledge that Professor Champika is going to share with us. Let me tell you a little bit about Champika. He is a well-experienced Internet technology and cybersecurity professional who is currently part of ICANN's office, and he is based in Asia Pacific. He is a regional manager of the technical team, so he represents ICANN in technical and security engagement activities in the region. Prior to ICANN, he held managerial, specialist, and liaison roles at the Asia Pacific Network Information Center, APNIC, the regional internet registry for the Asia Pacific region. I'm sure that you know LACNIC for Latin America and the Caribbean. So in Asia Pacific, the equivalent is APNIC. He started his career with IBM Corporation as a technical specialist, and later he worked in the IT industry as well as in academia, research, and training environments. He has a lot of teaching experience, and this is fantastic for all of you. He has been a regular speaker at different international security forums in Interpol, the Council of Europe, among others. He has received a number of excellence awards during his academic and professional careers. And if this is not enough for you, let me say that he also has a postgraduate degree in computer science and engineering, and also professional education qualifications in cybersecurity. So I will stop now. Welcome, Champ. We really thank you for getting up early today and be with us. So you have all your students at your disposal. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Sylvia, for that nice introduction. And I didn't expect that long introduction anyway. So also, actually, I would like to thank especially Daniel, the Lacrallo team, and Rodrigo, and the whole team, basically, to putting this session and also inviting me for this session. It is a great pleasure. So as Daniel discussed earlier, mainly this session is going to focus on the overview or kind of, overview, and also, going into some discussions related to the email address internationalization, or what we call EAI. So you can see that in the agenda, actually, the slide that I hope that it's a sort of synchronized slide that you can see as me. I am in the agenda page, where we have an overview of trainings, all kind of, we will give kind of an overview of the context, and then we go into introducing EAI, and then we will try to do some quiz after this session, as Daniel said, and then we will also consider what sort of things that we need to be aware when we try to configure email address internationalization. We will also have some quick look at various tools and this current support for those tools in terms of EAI, and then finally we will wind up with actually some considerations in relation to coming up with mailbox names with regard to EAI. And then we will have some Q&A session in the end. So that is the plan for today, and I hope that this session will give you some good understanding about this whole EAI topic. So let me go to the next slide. Okay, so let's have some introduction to email address internationalization. Now, obviously, as you can see, email address internationalization is some long word. So I would always refer to something called EAI in my slides, the upcoming slides. So whenever you see or whenever you hear when I say EAI, always refer to email address internationalization. Now, before really going in detail with regard to email address internationalization or EAI, we also need to understand the context of universal acceptance of domain names and emails. I believe there was a session earlier with regard to universal acceptance and in a broader discussion sense, but just for the context of this EAI, I will just try to quickly introduce that, especially in case if someone also new who could not attend the previous session of UA, this might be some refresher as well. So here, the universal acceptance, or simply we call UA, the whole goal of this UA is that all domain names and email addresses should work in all the software applications because it is very important that when we use different type of applications, we have to make sure that there are a number of considerations and functions that we may have to go through, especially, for example, like the application should accept these domain names and email addresses, or it should validate and process properly. And if these email addresses and domain names are being stored in, for example, some databases, they should be storing properly. And also if there are some display occurrences, then it should be displayed properly. So all these things should happen in a correct way because this is what we call universal acceptance. I mean, we have been using domain names and email addresses for a very long time. But when it comes to, but the thing is that from a historical point of view, we have mostly been dealing with ASCII or Latin-based characters, English characters, domain names and email addresses. But with the introduction of internationalized domain names, now we have to deal with the internationalized or different local language scripts, for example, in Spanish or various other scripts. So this is why the applications should adapt to this change. So the application, so for example, actually, in my case, I have some, I also speak a certain language in Asia, and so I have created an email ID in my own language, and now I have tried to actually I have tried to give that email ID in some of the registration forms when I try to register for various events and things like that. I have tried to give my local email ID, local script email ID, but most of the time it fails because the applications, the websites and so on, they do not accept my local language email ID. So it gives me an error or it says invalid email ID. So these are the things that we are referring here. So if you have if someone has a localized email ID, then that should be accepted by the applications, the web, the browsers, and so on. So that's the whole purpose of universal acceptance, where we have to make sure that all our applications, the software should accept these domain names and email addresses. I mean, this will, of course, promote the consumer choice, improve the competition, and, of course, provide broader access to end users, because majority of the Internet users, and if we have to bring the Internet to every part of the world, it is very important that the access should be given to people who not only speak English but also speak many other languages and also deal with many other languages. In fact, majority of the people in many countries, in many regions, they do English is not their English is not their first language. So this is why it's very important that we should provide access to this functionality. So going into my next slide, the categories of domain names and email addresses. Now here you can see that if you see the slide, we are talking about domain names and email addresses. Obviously, in email addresses, we use domain names, right? If you define an email address, you have your mailbox, right? Initially, we start with our mailbox, and then we have the @ symbol, and then on to our right, which is after the @ symbol, we have our domain or the domain name. Now, in this case, I'm just referring to an email ID when you write from left to right. But also, we should not forget that there are some languages that we write from right to left as well. So in that case, obviously, the whole format is different. So we have to cater for all these things as well. So internationalized domain names, or simply we call IDNs, this is where the domain names are being represented in local language scripts. And then we have EAI, as I described to you earlier, the email address internationalization. Now, when we deal with IDNs and EAI, it is quite important that we also have some understanding on this encoding scheme called UTF-8. During the early days of Internet, we used the encoding, we used number of encoding schemes, and ASCII was the the main one. And but there are some limitations of ASCII because in the ASCII representation, we could only use 127 characters. Say in English language, we have certain characters. We have the alphabet, small cases, upper cases, and then we have all other symbols and so on. So when you put together all that, we can put all those characters into 127, the table size of 127, and this is actually where we can represent, in fact, the ASCII character in a single byte, which means 8 bits. And so that works for ASCII or English or Latin-based script. But the problem is when we try to have more than ASCII characters, or more than English or Latin-based scripts, if we want to go and represent many other scripts in the world, then we cannot fit all that into that ASCII table or 127 characters. So this is why we have to have some other encoding schemes. So this is where, in fact, the Unicode consortium was also established, and then have the Unicode to represent different other scripts, the glyphs, basically. So based on Unicode, we have, again, number of other encoding schemes as well. We have UTF-8, we have UTF-16, we have UTF-32, and so on. But the thing is that UTF-8 is very much optimized for things like storage, storing the characters, and then the transmission, and so on. So this is why UTF-8 is also chosen, and so that we can have a variable number of bytes. For example, if you go with UTF-32, you have to have like 4 bytes every time if you want to store a certain glyph, which is actually base stage of space. Whereas when we go with something like UTF-8, we have a variable number of bytes. And also, actually, one of the other very important consideration of UTF-8 is that it is backward compatible with ASCII. So we don't have to change all that historical things what we have done with ASCII, and we can still go with ASCII, the English characters, representations, and all that we can still do with ASCII. But we can, basically, that is the other good thing about UTF-8. We can still have that backward compatibility with ASCII. So for all those purposes, it is very important for us to have some understanding of UTF-8, especially when we speak of IDNs and EAI. So now, when you take an internationalized domain names or internationalized, email address, always then we have to represent this in UTF-8. UTF-8 characters, so simply we call those as U labels. Now, there are different categories of this representation. Now, when you see a domain name, also we know that in the historically, when the internet started, we have our typical standard, generic top-level domains like the three-letter domain names like .com, .net, and so on. But then with the introduction of new generic top-level domains in the recent times, now we have many more top-level domains. Now, these top-level domains can be, of course, the English ones as well as the internationalized ones as well. So you can see there are a few categories. So we have newer top-level domains. These are what we call the short ones. For example, here we have Sky, because Sky is a short one, but still it is a new generic top-level domain. Then we also have longer top-level domains. Now, these are much longer than the three-character ones. Say, for example, here we have Abu Dhabi. So Abu Dhabi has a number of characters, and we call this as a longer top-level domain. And then we also have the internationalized domain names. Like in this case, this domain name is shown in Chinese characters. You can see, and that is in a different language script. So, as I said earlier, our applications, the software, the browsers and search engines and whatever you call it, we have to make sure that they can deal with these type of domains. And again, in a similar context, they should also be able to deal with our email addresses as well. So when you consider email address different categories, formats, sometimes our email IDs can have a ASCII mailbox, as I said earlier. This is left to the @ sign, so that is the mail. That is what we call a mailbox. So the mailbox can be in ASCII, and the domain can be as an internationalized domain name. So just for example, here you can see mark at this email ID. So here the word mark or the mailbox mark is in ASCII, whereas society that's actually in a different language script where you have accents and so on. Then we have other email. There could be some email IDs where we have a mailbox in UTF-8 format, the encoding scheme that I just mentioned to you earlier. So the mailbox can be in UTF-8, and then the ASCII, you can have a domain in ASCII. So in this case, in the second example, you can see our mailbox is actually in Hindi characters, different language script, but example.com is our domain, that is in ASCII. Then also we may have some other email addresses where the whole email address can be in UTF-8 based, different character scheme, and sometimes, even the mailbox can be in one local language script, and the domain name can be in another local language script. So there can be various ways. Now, all those email IDs that I just mentioned to you, we write from, left to right. But as I said earlier, there could be some email IDs that we write from right to left as well. For example, like Arabic. So in this case, on right side of the @sign is actually the mailbox, and then this left side of the @sign is actually your domain. But also it is important to understand that even though the representation, the look and feel is this way, the key sequence, the bit stream goes in the same way. When we type an email ID, whether it is from left to right or right to left, the bit stream goes, or the input is basically accepted in the same way. So I hope that this gives you some very quick overview of different type of domain names, internationalized domain names, and email addresses, different categories that we normally have to deal with. I'm going to my next slide now. So now earlier, Daniel also mentioned to you about the Universal Acceptance Steering Group. Now within ICANN, we have, with the community, there is a steering group. Maybe there might be some of you might be also involved in this as well, the UASG, or Universal Acceptance Steering Group. Now, UASG has its website, that is uasg.tech. It is uasg.tech. So in the uasg.tech website, you can see there are quite a lot of resources in relation to these UA and IDNs and EAI contents. So there are lots of white papers that have been published, a lot of studies that have been done. There are case studies and so on. So it is quite worthwhile. I mean, I would highly recommend that you should visit, or you should keep this usg.tech as a resource site for you to, when you're dealing with IDNs and EAI. So I'm referring to some of the documentation, some of the surveys and white papers that has been published in UASG website, or basically done by the UASG. So this is one of the surveys actually. So this is to check, how is the acceptance globally in different websites. How is the acceptance of email addresses when it comes to all these different categories that we discussed earlier? So you can see that this has been done over the last few years. So the data is available. You can see from 2017, 19, and 2020. So on the Y column, you can see that different email ID categories. So here you can see, for example, Arabic domain versus Arabic mailbox. As we know, in Arabic, we write from right to left. That's why it is in this format. And then we have something like Chinese email addresses, where the mailbox is also Chinese, and then the domain is also Chinese. And similarly, Chinese mailbox versus ASCII domains, and then ASCII mailbox versus Chinese domain, and sort of mix. Second level is Chinese, first level is top level is ASCII, and similarly, different all those. The TLD, remember I explained to you, like new long TLDs, new short TLDs. So we have tested all these things against, the support in different websites. And you can see that over the years there have been, of course, some improvement when it compares from 2017 to 2020. But you can see that support for some of the email IDs is not the great, because if you consider things like an Arabic email ID, for example, or if you consider a Chinese based email ID, only like less than 10% of the global top 1,000 websites. Actually, for this survey, they have considered top 1,000 websites globally, and so even the top 1,000 websites, only like less than 10% of that could support these type of email IDs. When it gets to like ASCII versus new short, the support is much better, almost like greater than 90% or so, even though it is not really 100%. But still, because that is more very close to our traditional ASCII generic top-level domain, based email IDs. So that is why ASCII versus New Short has got much better support in comparison to some of these local language scripts. So the whole idea, what you need to get out of this is that even the top websites are unable to support or they are not supporting it at this point of time. So it is our responsibility, and in case if you are running your own web servers, web applications and so on, make sure that your infrastructure can also support these internationalized domain names and email addresses. That's the whole point. So if we can improve on that, I think, that's the whole objective behind this discussion. Going to my next slide as well. So this is, again, some more statistics for you to have some understanding about the support for EAI under the different top-level domains. Now, this is based on the mail servers, because we all, in case if you, if you're involved with the mail servers, managing mail servers and DNS and so on, you know that you would publish your mail servers in the DNS using your MX records. There are records called MX records, and with the MX records, we publish our mail servers in the DNS. So when the mail servers actually want to forward mail from one server to another server, it will look at the domain, the DNS, and check, what are the relevant MX records, all the mail servers. So then we try to identify, if you consider these mail servers, how is the support? If we have internationalized email addresses, can these mail servers handle this? Whether, what's the support there? So again, when you consider the support, again, if there is a certain document, actually, if you're interested, you can go into details of this USD 021D document, and that can give you more detail about this whole study. But the end result is that only less than 10% of the domains of those, the mail server, the domains could really support EAI. So this is again less than 10%. So which means it is very important again from mail server's point of view as well. We should be able to support EAI. All right, so I believe that now with these statistics, you know the current situation, right? So it is very important for us to enhance our capability of supporting internationalized domain names and EAI. Okay, now let's go into details of understanding, because our discussion context here is all about email addresses. So we will try to understand a bit more on to the email addresses side. So typically in an email message, we can categorize into three parts. One is, of course, our envelope, right? So in the envelope, this is where we provide our addresses and so on, where it is being sent, and in case if it is to be returned, what should be the return address and so on. So this is where this information is carried out in the envelope. And then we have the message header, right? So in the message header, we have, again, some certain fields. Now, some of these fields are, of course, for the users and also for the system itself. For example, like from field or to field, or it could be the subject line, for example, or the email address in a plain text where the user can read and so on. So all this information are in the message header. As I said earlier, this message header is a combination of fixed and free format, because fixed formats are for for the systems, and then where you have free format for the users and so on. So that's your main message header. And then we have the message body itself. So in the message body, we have our email message. So this is where our really the email message text is there, and then of course things like the MIME, the attachment, and all that stuff, right? So this is in the message body. So these are the three important components where we have in an email ID. I'm going to my next slide. So now let's also try to understand about the email systems. So earlier we spoke about the email itself, right, the message. And then now we are talking about the email systems, how we are going to get this message delivered from one place to another place. And so in this case, again, in a typical email system consists of a few components, right? First of all, we have something called an MUA. So MUA is a mail user agent. Simply, this is a client program, right? So we generally, when we use email, we use different type of email clients. For example, maybe Outlook or maybe Thunderbird, or these are all mail clients, right? Or maybe we could be using a web-based mail client as well. So these are what we call mail user agents. And then when the mail user agent, submit the emails, it goes to a mail submission agent. Simply, we call it as mail. We call it as MSA or mail submission agent. So this is actually a server program, and it receives the email from the client or the mail user agent, and then prepare it for the sending or the transmission, right, and the delivery basically. So that is the job of MSA. And then we also have the MTA. Now, MTA is actually the mail transfer agent. Again, a very important component in this whole mail transmission. So this is a server program, and there could be a number of MTAs where the mail would get transferred from one to another and so on. And then finally it would reach what we call an MDA. So MDA is a mail delivery agent, right? So mail delivery agent is another server program, basically that handles the mail, and then typically it stores the emails so that the receiving client can come and download those mails from the mail delivery agent. So these are basically the different components that you will find in a typical email delivery system. Now, the whole idea here is that when we speak of EAI, or the email address internationalization, we have to make sure that all these different components or categories they should support the EAI-based emails. Okay, I'm now going to the next slide, and before that, I just wanted to actually make sure if everything is okay, that you can see everything clearly. I'm just going to the chat just to make sure there are no any issues. And because I don't see the, I'm not looking at the Zoom, I'm looking at my slides with the translation. So, okay, I'm going to my next slide now. So, email address internationalization. Okay, now let's try to understand. Now, you spoke about EAI. So, what is EAI and what is not EAI? Because earlier we described typically in a email message what are those different formats, and then also the email ID. Sorry, our email ID also has different categories, and then email message has got different parts. We have the headers, we have the message, and so on. So with all these considerations, what do we call an EAI and what is not really an EAI? So anything that we have support, UTF-8 support, right? Anything with the UTF-8 support for the mailbox names, that is actually, if you're considering something like, left to right email ID. Before the @sign, right? Before the @sign, that is what we say that's, of course, EAI. And also if the domain name also consists of this UTF-8, that also comes into that category. But what is not an EAI? So here, if you see there is UTF-8 support, say in your subject line or in the address comments or in the message body, if you now recall that, because I showed you there are 3 parts in our email message, right? So if it is in the subject line or if it is in the message body, all these different language characters, right, then we do not call it as an EAI because that is not relevant to our context here, right? All the attachments, the email message contains some local language scripts and so on. That's not EAI. That is not really part of this discussion. For the part of this discussion, we are only talking about the email ID itself, right? The mailbox name, the domain, and so on. Okay, because even earlier, even with ASCII emails, right, even previously, we could still handle, say, in an email body, if we have some local language scripts, that could still be handled, right? So that is not the discussion what we are having now, right? We are specifically talking about the email ID itself. Okay, I'm going to my next slide now. The levels of EAI implementation. Now, when you think of EAI implementation, we can speak of different levels, right? Because earlier, remember, we spoke about different applications, different tools, and so on. So if we are to evaluate some tools and so on, what are the criteria or implementation levels that we can think of? First of all, there is no EAI support, right? So the tool or the application, whatever the implementation, there's no EAI support. In this case, only the ASCII email addresses supported by the tools and services. Just like I said earlier, I try to give my own local language email ID. The web application said it is an invalid email ID. So there is no EAI support there, right? Nothing. So that is one level of implementation. There's no EAI support. And then there is also something we say level 1 support. So what is level 1 support? Here, we can exchange email with EAI addresses. So if I have an internationalized email ID, say I have email ID in my own language, and say if you have an email ID in Spanish, right, I can send to a Spanish email address, and I can receive from a Spanish email address to myself, right? So if I can receive and send email IDs between those EAI email addresses, we say that it is level 1 support. But in this case, but still in the level 1, we cannot create mailboxes and domain names in UTF-8. So if I want my tool or the application to create a mailbox for me in my own language or domain name, and if that application is unable to do that, then then that's what we call level 1, right? So we cannot create mailboxes. But when we say level 2 support, that is including the creation of mailbox. So level 2 support has got all the level 1 support, plus it can also create EAI email addresses, right? So that is the support levels that we are talking about. So even if, say, for example, if there are some web-based email service offerings, right? So you want to actually go to a certain web-based email service, and if you can create your own local language email ID, the mailbox, the domain, and then start sending from your own email, the local language email ID, to another EAI email address and receive emails, if you can do all that, then yes, we can say that that tool, that application has got level 2 support. But if you are not given the creation of mailbox facility, then we say level 1 support. If you don't have anything, then we just say no EAI support, right? So these are the different levels of EAI implementation levels that we have. Okay, now I think we have had some discussion now. Let us try to get into some quiz session, and then try to actually see whether you understood these things what we discussed. Okay, let me show you my first question. I believe Daniel is going to show this. You'll get this question in Spanish.
This is Daniel speaking. Thank you, Champika. I hope everybody can see the question, and I hope you, Champika, can see people sending replies. Can you see?
Yes. Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay. We have around 50 students, maybe. So I don't know if you want to share some hints, some comments so far, and
okay.
for you that
yes.
are for the students who are listening in English, and you can see the question in the chat. My friend Rodrigo Salcedo wrote in the chat the question. So, for example, Aika from Tanzania, you can send your reply in the chat, Aika. Thank you. Sorry, Champika.
No problem, Daniel. And so here you can see the question is applications present IDNs and EAI to users in the following encoding format. In fact, I did actually spoke about some of these encoding formats earlier. I did mention a little bit of history as well, why we have to move from ASCII to the current encoding scheme, what we are using, UTF-8, and then what is the purpose of UTF-8, what is the comparison with UTF-16 and 32, and we had some bit of discussion over that. So I believe a number of people have responded. I'm still getting some response. So if you see actually, Daniel, do you see everyone see this stats, or only it is myself I'm seeing this?
I will change now to share the results.
Okay.
Share results. Okay. Can you see the results? I think.
Yes, it is. So you can see that the good news is that majority of the people, they have given the correct answer. So actually the correct answer is UTF-8. So as I said, here we are talking about IDNs and EAI, right? So the whole purpose of IDNs and EAI is to represent those domain names and email addresses in local language scripts. And I told you that we don't have, ASCII is not capable of representing the local language scripts, right? So that is why we have to go something beyond ASCII, right? Which can represent, have some encoding scheme beyond ASCII. And that is where actually the Unicode-based encoding schemes were used. And even with the Unicode-based ones, there are a few formats like UTF-8, Unicode Transformation Format 8, then UTF-16 and UTF-32. But the thing is that UTF-8 is very much optimized, mainly because we can actually use variable number of bytes to store and transfer the messages. As I said, earlier, if we use UTF-32, for storing every local language script, you have to use like 4 bytes, which is actually wasting sometimes a bit of space. So that is why UTF-8 is optimized in terms of our requirements. So that's why we use UTF-8. So the answer is actually UTF-8. And so majority of people, they have got it. I believe there are a number of people who said some of the above. Probably you might be thinking UTF-8 and ASCII. But ASCII is not in the context of actually IDNs and EAI, right? Of course, UTF-8 is backward compatible with ASCII, so that, we don't have to do any changes with what we have been doing all this time. But in the case of IDNs and EAI, the answer is UTF-8. So I hope this clarifies your understanding. Okay. Daniel, you can stop sharing this, and let's go to our next question. Is .IEEE a valid top-level domain?
Champika, this is Daniel speaking.
Yes. Yes, Daniel.
Meanwhile, we have a question from Gabi. In your slide 8, there is one example who said UTF at IDN. She's asking if this means UTF-8 or it's okay.
Yes, actually, IDN is pretty much UTF-8 anyway. It is a U label, or simply it is UTF-8. So, we just wanted to differentiate the mailbox and the domain. That's why it says IDN. But there could be 2 different ways. One is that mailbox can be in one language, and the IDN could be in another language, right? Not ASCII, but in a different language. Or the whole email ID, including the mailbox and the IDN part, could be in, say, in Spanish, for example, right? So mailbox can be in, say, in Chinese, and the IDN can be in Spanish, or the mailbox can be in Spanish, IDN can be in Chinese, or the whole email ID can be in Spanish. So it is all UTF-8.
Okay, she's complementing that this is not informed in the slide 8. Okay, thank you, Gabi. I think we can review that and send it back to you. Thank you.
Okay, and
she means that the UTF at IDN should be like UTF-8 at IDN. I think that's what she means.
Let me actually go back to that slide. So I think, yes, correct. So it should be UTF-8, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, it should be UTF-8 at IDN.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Gabi.
Good.
Yes, she's good catch.
Yes. Okay, I think let's have a review of this question. Is IEEE a valid top-level domain? It's actually 50-50, right? If you see the answers, it's half of the class say yes and half of the class say no. Now, if I just tell you the answer, it is yes. It is a valid top-level domain. So the people who said yes is correct. But my question to you is actually, So you don't have to type. But my question is that how do you know whether it is valid or not, right? That is the question. Now, the people who said yes, how did you say it is yes? Did you just randomly, did you just put yes? Or did you check somewhere and said yes? Right? Same goes to the people who said no. Did you go and check somewhere and then found out that it is no? Or you just simply said yes or no, right? So that's the thing that you have to think about. So you have to here to see whether it is a valid top-level domain. You need to go to IANA database of top-level domains, because in IANA, in IANA.org, right, there is a list of delegated valid top-level domains. So there is a database. So if you want to say, for example, in this case, if you want to see .IEEE, whether it is valid or not, you need to go to the IANA list and check whether that exists in the IANA list, right? Without going there, we don't know whether it is really valid or not, right? So it is very important, especially if you are a developer and so on. If you are doing some parsing based on if you want to parse a top-level domain to say that this is a valid one, right? You need to refer to the IANA list of top-level domains, right? Because these top-level domains, and it can come and go. Tomorrow we might have a new top-level domain, or something that exists today might go offline tomorrow, right? So the things can change. So that is why, it is dynamic. It is not a static list as such. So always it is a good practice. If we want to make sure it is a valid top-level domain, we have to refer to the IANA list of top-level domains, right? Okay. All right, so let's actually now, it's good. I think we got some practice. So let's now have some further discussion and go into the email, the things in terms of configuring for EAI. Okay, so let's see what are the prerequisites for setting up EAI, right? Now, there are, of course, these are some considerations, right? Prerequisites. When we want to set up EAI, these things should be, these are important things to consider. Now, first of all, when we speak of those Unicode UTF-8, there is something called normalization. So what is normalization? Say, for example, when you type a certain character or a certain glyph, right? Say a certain Spanish character or any different language character, sometimes we can represent that in multiple ways. Say, for example, if I want to display or if I want to type a certain character, maybe I can do it with multiple key sequences or different keys or different glyphs. Or it could be a single key sequence. So if it is, say in this example, you can see that, consider this E with the accent, right? So in this here, there is this glyph, the E with the accent, because in some languages like French and so on, you have these letters with the accent, right? So if you consider this E with the accent, you can also type it with a certain key sequence. You can do it with the E and then with the accent key, right? So there are two key sequences. Now for these two key sequences, you will have two code points, the Unicode code points. One is actually, for this E, we have the code point 0065, because always when we represent a code point, this is the format we use. U means to say Unicode, and then plus, and then 0065, right? So that is the code point for this E. And then we have this accent, the code point for that is this 0300, right? 0300 is the code point. So if you are referring with these two sequences, these are two code points. But if you are actually representing that character with a single key sequence or with a single key, it has a single code point, which is 00E8, right? So we cannot expect having multiple code points for the same representation. So this is why we have to do something called normalization, because whether you give these or give these, it should be the same, right? So in this case, it is normalized to 00E8. Even if you give 0065 and 0300, it is normalized to 00E8, right? So this is what we say normalization. And again, in normalization, there are different forms. We use something called normalization form C to do this normalization. So this is done in the applications, right? And this is something to understand, because we cannot expect you have different key sequences for different same representation of the same symbol, right? And then also support both representation of IDN labels. Now, earlier we had some good discussion about UTF-8 and then ASCII, right? So the labels that are in ASCII, we call those as A labels, right? We call those as A labels. And the labels that are in Unicode, we call those as U label, or the UTF-8, we call those as U labels. So if we have a certain U label, say in this case, we have an example here, right? So this is an example because we have an A with a certain character here, right? So this is actually a U label. So if we want to convert this into an A label or ASCII, there is a conversion process, right? And there are, of course, there are conversion tools and so on. And then based on this conversion, we can convert this U label to an A label, and this is the final A label. So always, this last part, X and hyphen, then we have, label. This is what the final A label. And simply, we also call this as a puny code, right, when it comes to IDNs and so on. Always we can identify with the X and hyphen. Now, why we are doing this? Because the DNS, right, when we send the DNS request, they are all based on ASCII, because the DNS request, the responses are based on ASCII. That is why these Unicode-based labels need to be converted to an ASCII label, because the DNS can handle it, right? Because when the DNS protocol was defined long time ago, like maybe 40 years ago or so, it was all done based on the ASCII. That is why the DNS queries responses are all resolved based on ASCII. So we have to convert these U labels to an A label so that DNS can handle it, right? That's the whole purpose. And now, all these, IDN standards, the rules, these internationalized domain names related standards, right? So this is all, there is a standard document, and that is called IDNA, or simply internationalized domain name for applications. Initially, the first version of this came in 2003. So you have a version called IDNA 2003 version, which is old now. It is deprecated. We don't use that. So the current use version is IDNA 2008 version. And so things like libraries and all that is in the IDNA 2008. So if we are doing some development work and so on, we should be referring to the IDNA 2008 standard, right? So always try to use IDNA 2008, not the IDNA 2003, because that's the old one. Now, do not use code libraries that have a static list of top-level domains. I think I did mention this to you earlier. If you are doing some parsing and things like that, do not use any static list of top-level domains. Because many applications, they could be using, that is why actually earlier we saw that out of 1,000 top websites, only small percentage of those websites could support, because some probably, they may not be using the proper IDNA 2008, libraries and so on. They could be using a static list, right? Maybe the historical top-level domains. That is why they cannot parse it. So that's why if we are using, always try to refer to the IANA list of TLDs. That is important, okay? Do not use regular expressions for user input validation for internationalized identifiers. Use IDNA 2008 libraries for IDA. So this is again something that we should always consider, because we have a standard, IDNA 2008 standard. We should be referring to the IDNA 2008 libraries if we are using some regular expressions for parsing. I mean, sometimes some of developers, they could be parsing based on say the different other regular expressions, like say the @ sign, for example. I mean, it is not really recommended, because sometimes, it's okay if you want to do some generic parse, just to parse whether it is an email ID or not. But if you want to go into very specifics, then you should always use the IDNA 2008 libraries. That is important, okay? Okay, now I am going into my next slide, email protocol changes for EAI. Yes, Daniel.
One question from Savio about the DNS queries. So some DNS query will always be in Unicode, or the most recent implementations also accept UTF-8?
The DNS query will be, say if you are talking of a UTF-8 based domain like label, IDN, always the DNS query will be based on the ASCII label, right? The Unicode. So that is why XN --. So even, for example, in our zone files, and so on, we have to have that A label or the Unicode, basically. You don't put the UTF-8.
Okay, thank you.
But of course, things like browsers and so on, they can display it, right? Say, for example, when you type, if you type a domain name, you don't need to type, the whole Unicode like XN --, that kind of stuff. When you want to type a domain, of course, you can type the U label, the UTF-8. So the application should be able to convert it to the ASCII label. I hope that's
Brilliant.
clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Savio. Thank you, Champ.
Yeah. So now let's consider the email protocol changes for EAI. So in the case of protocol changes, now earlier I was talking about different components of the email system, right? So we have MUAs, we have MTAs, and so on, right? And when the email gets transferred from, between these components, we also use different protocols, right? Now, between the MTAs, between the mail servers, we use SMTP, right? Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And so we have to make sure to support EAI. The SMTP should also adapt to this change. So we say, it should be augmented to support EAI, right? So there is a certain signaling flag Now, if you remember, like in email communication, right? So when in the SMTP protocol, when the mail servers talk to each other, the receiving mail server respond to the sending mail server what it can support. For example, whether it can support MIME, right, attachments and things like that. So once the sending mail server knows that, it can send the attachment to the receiving mail server. So in the same way, even with EAI, the receiving mail server has to acknowledge that it can support EAI. So that acknowledgement flag is what we call SMTP UTF-8. So there is a certain signaling flag that the receiving mail server should acknowledge to the sending mail server, and that is SMTP UTF-8. So we specifically say that we have to the mail servers, they have to have the SMTP UTF-8 support, right? So this is very, very, very important. So all the SMTP servers in the path, they must support EAI to successfully deliver the email. That is important, right? So this is with regard to SMTP. And also, now we also know when we download the email, if I'm a client, right, mail user agent, if I want to download my emails, I go to my mail server, the mail delivery agent, right, and then I download my emails. So we use a different protocol for that. We use either POP, the post office protocol, or we use IMAP, right? So these are different protocols that we use, either POP or IMAP. So even these POP or IMAP protocols also should have the EAI support. So again, there are flags to represent that support as well. So we have to make sure that from email server's point of view, email transition point of view, we have to make sure that our protocols like SMTP, POP, IMAP should support EAI as well. Okay. I'm going to the next slide now. So you can see here, in detail, we'll take a SMTP UTF-8 example. So here we have a sender and we have the receiver. So these are the clients, right, the mail user agents. Now for demonstration sort of purposes, we have a few MTAs in the middle, right? And then these MTAs are mail transfer agents. Between the MTAs, we have SMTP protocol, right? Whereas with the MUA, we have POP or IMAP. Now, between two MTAs, between two mail servers, let's consider this is the sending mail server, and then let's consider this is the receiving mail server, right? So this MTA is sending a mail to this receiving mail server. So, or basically forwarding, right? Now, during this process, there has to be some handshaking process has to happen, right? So, for example, initially the sender will connect to the receiver and then wait for the response from the receiver, and then receiver will have to respond with a certain code saying that what is the domain of the receiver, and then the protocol support. So in this case, it is ESMTP, the extended SMTP, basically. And then once that once the sender gets that acknowledgement, sender will send a hello message. So extended hello message in this case, and send the sender's domain. And then receiver will acknowledge, and then receiver will acknowledge, and receiver will also respond. This will provide all these codes, right? Typically, these codes starting from 2, when it is success. So it will say that, okay, I can successfully support 8-bit MIME, for example, right? The attachments. And then I can also support SMTP UTF-8. So this is the key here. So the receiver has to actually acknowledge with a flag to the sender that it can support SMTP UTF-8. So that's the important thing. If this sender doesn't get that SMTP UTF-8 signal from this receiver, it is not going to send an email, EAI-based email to that receiver, right? So we have to make sure that this receiver has to respond with SMTP UTF-8 flag. And then after that, of course, the regular emails, conversation stuff. Then the sender can send the email ID. Once this acknowledgement is received, sender can send the email ID in the local language script. So in this case, in Chinese script, the email ID can be sent, and the receiver accepts that. And then receiver will, of course, also the sender will send what should be the receive to address as well. And then recipient will accept it. And then once it is all done, we can send the message of the data, basically, right? We can send the subject line, we can send the email body, and so on. And earlier, I also told you that if there are any characters in the body that is not relevant to the EAI context anyway, in the EAI, we are talking only about the email ID part. So which means that SMTP UTF-8 flag has to be accepted by the receiver, okay? So that's something that we have to make sure, especially from mail server administrator's point of view, you have to take care of that. Make sure that your mail server can support that SMTP UTF-8, okay? All right, now speaking of these protocol changes and delivery path considerations based on the discussions what we had, so all those different components, right, different mail servers, different components, they should all have SMTP, they should all have SMTP UTF-8 support, which means EAI support. Even if one of them do not have that support, so even if one of them in the middle cannot support it, then we will not be able to deliver the email. That is the problem. So in the whole email delivery part, everyone has to make sure that they can support EAI. That is the key, right? Even if a single SMTP server in the path does not support EAI, then the email ID will not be delivered. Email will not be delivered, okay? So that's something that you need to be aware. Okay, what other things? So in case if the email cannot be delivered, say for example, I am a mail server and you are a mail server, right? So I am the sending mail server, you are the receiving mail server. If you don't acknowledge me with the SMTP UTF-8 flag, yes, Daniel.
Sorry, are you in slide 22 or 21?
I am actually, I've gone to 23 now.
23, okay, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes, okay, sorry. And I have a question for you later.
Okay, so I was just telling that in this slide 23 that, we have to make sure everyone in the path, right, should support EAI. All the mail servers in the path should support EAI. Even if one of them cannot support EAI, then the delivery will not happen. So now I'm going into slide 24. So if the delivery cannot happen, say for example, if I cannot deliver to you, if both of us are mail servers, I am the sending mail server and you are the receiving mail server. So if you cannot receive my, if you don't respond me with a SMTP UTF-8 flag, which I'm not going to deliver that to you, so that means I have to basically drop that email and then send a delivery failure message to the sender, right? So that should happen. Just like, even our usual email systems, if the email cannot be delivered, then we send a failure message to the sender. So that has to happen. Okay, now I am going into slide number 25. Now, there are some additional considerations that we have to consider here. One of the things is that case folding, right? Because in traditional English email IDs, we don't have problem with case folding. Either you can write your email ID in capital letters in English or small letters, right? It doesn't really matter. And but this is not the case with EAI-based email ID. This is not automatic, basically, right? So the case folding functionality is not automatically implemented in most of these EAI-ready software, right? Also, actually, now this is not a big deal when it really comes to different EAI-based email addresses, local language scripts, because unlike in English, in many of the languages, we do not have this case folding matter, right? We don't have small letters or capital letters and things like that. So this, it depends on the language script that you're using. But one thing that what you have to know is that case folding is not automatically supported in the EAI software. Okay. Now, with regard to spam, there is no change of spam procedures that what we do. Typically, in usual emails, we have our to handle spam. We use things like SPF. We use things like DKIM and so on. We still have to use all that even with EAI. But if there are some people who are developing some spam filters and things like that, also be aware of this whole issue, because sometimes some spam filters, by looking at the email ID itself, when it is EAI-based email ID, the spam filter might straight away filter that. So if there are some spam filter developers and so on, this is something that they should take into consideration and not to just filter out the EAI-based email addresses. And then in a lot of software and services, most of them do not have support services for EAI, and that is why actually we have to bring this message to the community, for the developers, to the mail server supporters and so on, operators and so on, so that you all can support this whole thing, right? Okay, now I just want to quickly show you some tools in terms of support, because we are talking about the support. I'm in the slide 27 now. So you can see a kind of, chart here. This is again being extracted from the UASG website that I told you earlier, UASG 030, that is the paper. So this paper talks about the evaluation of EAI support in email software and services report. So this covers many tools and email tools and services. Also different components, because we went through different components, right? You have MUAs, you have MSAs, MPAs, and so on. And also actually, if you remember, we also talk about different implementation levels. We spoke about level 2, we talk about level 1, we talk about no EAI support, and so on. So if you refer to this matrix, you can see that there are some tools that can support, L2 support for certain components, and then there are some tools, they have partial support, and some of these tools are not tested by USG yet. So this matrix can give you some understanding about what tools and services actually in terms of EAI support at the moment. All right, I think we are into another quiz time, so we can have another quiz, I believe. So let me also actually try to display the slide 29, which is actually the quiz number 3. Daniel, you can.
Let's do the quiz 3. Okay.
So the question here is that, is the following statement true or false? for email address internationalization to work, all MPAs should support SMTP UTF-8 signaling flag. Yeah, I think, Daniel, you can display the results. I think here that's pretty much majority of the class. Maybe probably only one person, maybe by mistakenly clicked the other ones, I guess. But everyone says that it is true, which is correct answer, right? Because, we have had some discussion over that point. Yes, the email servers MPA should support SMTP UTF-8. Okay, question number 4. Which of the following statements are true when sending and receiving an email with EAI?
It's a longer question, so they need to read.
Yes. The question is a bit longer. So if I just actually try to express. So the A is all email parties should be involved in delivery part, have to be updated for EAI support. So if you remember, we have a whole delivery part. There are many nodes, email parties involved. So the A is whether everyone should support or have updated EAI support, whether it is true or not. And then second one is the B is if a single SMTP server in the path does not support EAI, then the email will not be delivered. Right? And the third one is POP and IMAP servers could provide downgraded emails to non-EAI confirming email clients, but it is not recommended. Here, actually, we didn't have much of discussion around this. Now, earlier I did explain you that, of course, the receiving client have to use this POP or IMAP protocol to download the emails, right? So this is the, from mail delivery agent to the client. Now, in this case, probably we can have some discussion when we see the answers, I guess. And D is none of the above. Yes, I think if you share, so if I see the results, a lot of people will say A is correct. Yes, that is right. So everyone who said A is correct, that's all good. And if a single SMTP server in the path does not support EAI, then the email will not be delivered. That is also correct, right? Remember, here we are asking which of the following statements. So there can be one or more true answers, right? So one or more true answers. So even the second one is also correct. So whoever said second one is also correct. So A is right, B is also right. What about C? And C is POP IMAP servers could provide downgraded emails to non-EAI confirming clients, but this is not recommended. Actually, this is also right. It is also true because the mail delivery agents can still give that, in the last leg to the client, right? The POP and IMAP servers can still give that email, but there is a problem there. I mean, it can give as a downgraded email. So when I say downgraded email, that means the local, because the support is not there, the local language scripts will not be displayed properly to the client, right? So if I am the client I will get the email, but all those local language scripts, the characters, will not be properly displayed, which is not very good, because if I don't see all the characters, it's no point, right? So that is why we say that even though you can just give a downgraded version, it is not really recommended, right? Because the client can't do much of it, because the characters cannot be displayed. And so that's why the C is also correct. And so the answers are A, B, and C. So whoever said A, B, and C is all correct. Okay?
Champika,
all right, so I hope that... Yes, Daniel.
Yeah, I did a mistake preparing the pool, and I configure as one single answer. So I apologize to all students because I didn't allow the multiple answers option. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
We are
no
discussing
okay.
in the chat, and thank you, right? Can I
yeah, no problem. That's
read
okay.
you a question from
yes,
Nicolas?
Sure.
Champika.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you can read in the chat. Nicolas was very kind to write in English and Spanish. It's a bit
okay.
long. So if you want, I can read for you.
Yeah, sure. And and also actually, I just want to apologize a bit. I think we're just passing that time limit. I hope we can take another 10 minutes or so to go through it, because we still have a last part, because we have a bit of introduction in the beginning, so we lost a bit of time. So I hope we can stay for another 10-15 minutes.
Okay. So the question from Nicolas is, I have a question regarding DNS related to EAI and IDN. So looking at the acceptance graph of email servers and then the different levels of compliance, I was wondering what would happen in the case that delivery agents should make the resolution to an address like arabic1.arabic2.arabic3 I imagine that in that scenario, new recursive DNS resolution problems could arise outside of what are the problems between mail servers, and if the name servers are not even compatible with IDN at the time of delivery. Could that be represented as another higher level of compliance? Could this factor affect the initial graphics on those mail servers that have more than one level of DNSs? Thank you.
Yeah, the question was a bit long. I couldn't follow some of the part, but I mean, just as I understood, I think the question was more about, if the delivery from the MDA to the client, especially, if you have some different type of mailbox name scenarios. Is that right? Now, in terms of DNS, I just want to also clarify that in terms of DNS, actually the mailbox name doesn't come into the picture, right? Because in an email ID, we have, remember, in a left to right email ID, first part is your mailbox, right? And then that is before the @sign. And after that sign, that is the domain. So to the DNS, in terms of DNS query, we only look at the domain, right? The mailbox name doesn't really matter to the DNS side. So that has to be actually, the mailbox name has to be dealt locally, right? Because that is the mailbox name. In fact, we also have another section after this, giving some recommendations to come up with some proper mailbox names, because that is also important for an mail administrator in a organization, have some proper naming conventions for the mailbox names. That is because that is handled locally, right? But in terms of DNS is concerned, it's only the part which is after that sign, right? And that's the domain part. That is what being taken care of the DNS side. if there's any, maybe some further clarifications or maybe some further questions, maybe I hope that could be Nico. We could have a discussion after that.
Thank you.
All right. So let me then go to our next part, which is actually the one that I told you earlier, right? Consideration for mailbox names, because mailboxes is, this is not, of course, handled by the DNS itself, the mail service and so on, right? So this is local stuff. So when we come up with the mailbox names, what are the best practices that we have to consider? So consideration of mailbox names using EAI. Now, first of all, there is a white paper on this in the UASG website. If you go to UASG 028, that's the document related to this consideration for naming internationalized mailboxes. Okay. Now, here there are a few things that we have to consider. One thing is whether the script is supported, because if you consider, say, in the world there are so many scripts, right? There are many languages, many scripts, and so on. The question is whether all these scripts are being supported, say, in Unicode, right? That is a question, because even if you consider Unicode, even within Unicode, right, there are some 140 something scripts possibly, and then when it comes to IDNs and EAI, again, it would be a subset of that. Not all those scripts in the Unicode are also supported in IDNA, for example, right? And so we have to actually, first of all, ensure that whether the script, when you are giving a certain mailbox name using a certain script, we have to make sure whether that is being supported or not. That is important. And the other thing is also whether there are any confusing characters, because different language scripts, they have similar looking characters. Sometimes it can be confusing to the user. So if you are giving a mailbox or an email ID, right, make sure that such confusions do not occur, right? So that is also important, especially the security confusions, because if there are some security concerns, then that would be a problem, right? Easily a phishing attack can be carried out. And then length of a mailbox name string, right? Length of a mailbox string. This is because we cannot, because some organizations might be having a certain policy on mailbox name length. If you are talking an ASCII mailbox, say for example 10 characters. I'm just picking something, right? So 10 character ASCII name. But if you use same with 10 character EAI name, right, mailbox, when it comes to storage, as I said, the capacity is different, because storing a single ASCII character versus storing EAI based, UTF-8 based character is different. Sometimes you might need few bytes of space to store one character of UTF-8 in comparison to an ASCII character. So 10 ASCII characters does not always mean 10 characters of UTF-8, right? So this is what I'm just trying to say, that you may have to actually come up with a certain policy in terms of length of mailbox names as well. And then script mixing. This is actually to make sure that you allow limited mix. You see, the script mixing doesn't happen in the domain part, right? Because the different registries and so on, they have their own policy in terms of script mixing. You cannot do script mixing when it comes to the domain side. But if you are talking of, say, the mailbox name, if you want to do some script mixing, you need to do it in a very careful way, because this can always, some different languages, they have similar script. Even if you take, say, for example, English, you have English E, you have a same sort of E in Cyrillic, like in Russian, right? Same thing. So the user, the same display, same look and feel. So if you use English E and Cyrillic E in the same mailbox, then there is always some confusion there. So that is why script mixing is not really recommended, and you always have to take care with the script mixing. And then what other considerations? Preventing invalid and unstably rendered strings. So this is why we have to consider the language rules, because sometimes in some languages you have to really follow the rules, right? Because one character may not follow, even though when we take a certain label, in the label, based on the language, certain characters should follow certain characters, right? These are language rules. So even when you're giving a certain mailbox, not only you should just consider the glyph for the character, but also you should consider the language rule, whether the language rule will allow that. Now, to do that, there are some tools available. So rather than you just make up your own name, it is always better to use a tool and validate through a tool and check whether this is okay. So this is why actually for many of the language scripts, there have been some language generation panels, right? Language generation panels, and they have developed the rules for their own languages. And so we have this reference IDN tables, so we should refer to those IDN tables and check what are the valid strings, right? And also we can use, or you can use the string validation tool, LGR tool. This is linked from the ICANN website. So you can use this validation tool if you want to validate a certain string to make sure, before you give a certain mailbox to someone, make sure you validate that, and if it is validated, then only give that mailbox, okay? So that's something to consider. And then right-to-left scripts. Now, this is, again, when you use things like Arabic script, this is from right to left. There can be a lot of confusability, security issues, especially if you are mixing left to right scripts versus right to left scripts. So it is not really a good idea to mix these left to right and right to left scripts in the mailbox, because this will add some more confusability into the use. And then alias and display name considerations. It's always good to have some alias, because sometimes in case if the EAI-based email cannot be delivered, then having an alias will help. So you can try to create an ASCII alias, right? You can try to create an ASCII alias so that at least if the EAI email is not being delivered, at least we can get the ASCII email delivered, right? So that's a good practice we should follow. The thing is that especially if you are when you operate mail servers, we also need to understand that, like in DNS, we put MX records, right? Say we have 3 MX records. We have mail server 1, we have mail server 2, and we have mail server 3, okay? And now depending on the priority, sometimes we could be taking mail server 1 to deliver the mail. And sometimes we could be taking mail server 2, or in case if the mail server 2 is down, we could be taking mail server 3, depending on the priorities and so on. Say if one of those mail servers do not support EAI, right? So initially, when the mail server 1 is all okay, the mails might get delivered. Say if the mail server 1 is down for some reason, and based on the priority, it tries mail server 3 or 2, and if it cannot support EAI, then the mail will not be delivered. So we see that sometimes, when I send an email to an EAI email address, sometimes the mail get delivered because it goes through a mail server that can be delivered. Sometimes the mail delivery fails because it goes through, depending on the priority, it goes to a mail server that cannot be delivered because we have different mail servers. So this is why the failures can happen, and having an alias mailbox is always beneficial, right? Okay, and signs and symbols. Next slide, slide 34, signs and symbols. In English language, we use different signs and symbols. Sometimes in an email ID, we use a dot in the middle, right? Or we use an underscore, or we use a hyphen, things like that in our English email IDs. In the same way, in our local language scripts, we can use different symbols and characters. That local language script can have different symbols, different characters, and so on. So if you are using those different signs, different symbols, different characters in a specific local language, make sure it is properly validated. That is important. You need to review, right? You need to review these different other characters and make sure these characters do not cause any security issues. These characters do not create any, input issues, to the keyboard and things like that, right? So that's something to consider. And then Unicode character normalization. I think I already told this earlier, because sometimes we can, for the same character, we can have multiple key sequences. So if you have to do the same character with multiple key sequences, we have to do something called normalization, right? So that needs to be considered. And going into the slide 35, equivalence considerations. Now, this is where actually in some I'm not sure how this affects with the Spanish, but with some languages, say for example, if you take Chinese, in Chinese, you have something called simplified Chinese. You have something called traditional Chinese. And you can have the same word or same label, right, both in simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese, but the meaning is different, right? So to the user, look and feel is same, but the meaning is different. So if you are using, some different, mailboxes, different labels like that, you also have to be careful, especially, depending on the language script that you're using. You need to have some proper policies. Say, for example, if I am, in the Chinese example that I gave, if I am giving in traditional Chinese a certain label, and we also have the simplified Chinese, the same label, same looking label, I should reserve that. I should not give that traditional label to another person, right? So because then if I give traditional label to one person and simplified label to another person, then it creates confusion and it creates a security issue as well, right? So these are also things that we need to be careful. And then other considerations, domain names in international non-ASCII names. So when you display the domain names, we should not display in that Punicode, right? Also earlier I told you, like when you display something, display that in proper UTF, base name or the non-ASCII name, and avoid displaying in XN -- the non-ASCII code, because always displaying in ASCII label like XN -- something, that can create some confusion to the user as well, right? So we shouldn't. We should display in the U label. I think with this discussion, we'll get into the quiz, the last quiz, I believe, this one. You can see based on this discussion so far we had, whether how you go with this quiz.
Now I made sure we have multiple choices for answering.
Yes, we have some multiple choice we can have multiple answers here. It's not just only one answer, right? So which of the following statements are false? This time we're asking the false ones. Daniel, I'm not seeing the input from the users.
Oh no.
Oh, doesn't matter actually. You can tell me what it is.
Mm-hmm. So I will end the pool now, and perhaps you'll be able to see sharing results.
Oh yeah, I can see it now. Yes.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So I see that people here. 3, 4, 5. So we have answers for all those, but majority of them say yes for A. So let's have a look. So here we are asking the false ones, right? So let's say the first one, A. Universal acceptance is the state in which all valid domain names and email addresses are accepted, validated, stored, processed, displayed correctly and consistently. In fact, this was my first slide, right? If you remember, I told you the whole purpose. Universal acceptance is all about, all our software applications and everything, accept our domain names and email addresses. I told you, I gave an example that I know I have my own local email ID and I tried to register to an event and it didn't accept. So that is, UA is not there, right? Universal acceptance is not compliant with that. So A is correct, right? So the answer A is correct. So, but we are asking for the false ones. So A is true. So let's go to B. B is to achieve universal acceptance. Internet applications and systems must treat all top-level domains in a consistent manner, including new generic top-level domains and all internationalized top-level domains. What do you think? This is also true, right? To achieve universal acceptance, all our internet applications and systems must treat all PLDs, the old ones, the new ones, the new longer ones, new short ones, everything. All should be treated in consistent way, and also the new generic TLDs, new GTLDs, and IDNs and everything should be accepted. So B is also correct. So that is what we say universal acceptance. So B is also true. Now C, all domain names should be validated against the IDN in IDNA applications, IDNA 2003 standard. Now, I told you there are two standards. One is IDNA 2003, and the other one is IDNA 2008. And I told you that IDNA 2003 is deprecated, it's outdated. We should not follow that. So, in this case, all domain names should be validated against IDNA 2008. That should be the correct one. If you say IDNA 2003, that is false. Okay? So, C is false. Okay? C is false. And then D, the A label represents domain label in Unicode UTF-8 format. That is false. A label means ASCII label, not UTF-8. So A label is ASCII label, not UTF-8. So D is false. E, the A label format is used to represent mailbox names in EAI. That is also wrong, because in EAI mailbox names, I told you the representation should be in U label, not in A label, right? A label is that X and hyphen, ASCII label. So E is also false. So actually the answer for this question, because we are looking for false, C, D, and E. So I hope this clarifies this query. Okay, let's go to the next quiz. Now, unfortunately, I cannot, because if Danielle can, you have Danielle this. If you can cut and paste this.
Yes, we have in the chat the link that people can make the
yeah. So you can
query.
Provide the link. Yeah,
it's here in the chat. Rodrigo Salcedo just shared, so you can open your browser and check for the A label for this Chinese sentence.
Yes, actually, unfortunately, okay, let me, because I can't copy from the Zoom, right?
Okay, can you see the chat? We already have an answer from Nubia. If you see the Zoom chat, Champika.
Zoom chat, okay, let me see the Zoom chat. Oh, okay. Yes, we have an answer. Okay, so basically go to that tool, because if you go to that tool that is in ICANN website, let me try to post the
Thank you, Sarmad, for providing me the correct answer. Can you see the chat?
So the A label, yeah, I was asking the A label, right? So if you see the A label, so let me actually type into the chat.
We have many answers with U plus 6D for B, U plus 8B D5.
No.
And other answers are XN. Oh, yeah.
We were asking the A label, right? Don't get confused. We were asking the A label. That U plus, that is actually the Unicode, U label.
U plus
we
is
were
Unicode.
Asking, yes.
A label is
XN0 ZWM. That's the one, 56D.
Okay.
Do you get that point? So if you want, in case if you, when you go to that LGR tool in the website, you get to the web page, and then on your top right, you have something called label forms, right? Click on that label forms, and then you get a pop-up box, and it says you can give any label. Say, you can give a Spanish label, for example, and then click on display forms, and then you will get what is the code point for that, and the A label, corresponding A label. Okay.
Okay, great. Very good. Yes, many correct answers now. I think it was very clear.
All right, looks good. And that looks good. All right, I think that pretty much actually winds up our session. So now I am into the slide 39, which is actually some reference materials, and for you to get involved in all these, especially if you want to, especially if you you use Spanish quite widely, and if you want to get involved in this whole UA, supporting UA and EAI, these are some ways that you can be involved. You can see there is UASG email IDs over there, the reference to the UASG.tech website, and also there are some wiki pages where you can see a lot of ongoing work. These are all, a lot of volunteers. They are working on various different aspects of this. You can still participate in a lot of discussions, UA-related discussions. There are some mailing list subscriptions. And then there are some working groups as well, because, this consists of different stakeholders, right? There are technical stakeholders, there are, mail server operators, there are software developers, and then, various parties, policy developers, and so on. So see what is relevant to you and try to, contribute to that. And then there are some relevant materials in the next slide, slide 41. All those references to many of those discussions I had today. There are some white papers, surveys, detailed studies, and so on. So try to refer to those documents as well. And links are given from these different documents. I think, that winds up our session. We have taken extra half an hour. But I believe that's all for good anyway. And I hope that discussion has been useful. And you can also be in touch with us, both our Samad, our UA program director, and myself. Our contact details are here. And also in your region, you have, of course, Daniel, Nico, Rodrigo, and the whole team there. You can get plenty of support from them as well. And it is very nice talking to this community, and if there are any discussions, we can have some more. Otherwise, look forward to being in touch.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Professor Ciampica. It was a real privilege to have you talking to our region today. Thank you so much. Many greetings in the chat. Thank you for all the participants. Thank you to our friends from Lacralo. And big thank you to the interpreters who helped us a lot today. The translation was perfect. Thank you very much, everybody. And see you in the next week with Professor Sarmad in the Java for the Universal Acceptance session. It will be really great. Have a good day, Ciampica.
Thanks.
And we'll keep in touch.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, everyone, and thank you very much. And sorry that I couldn't go through all the chat. I know there are a lot of messages and some in Spanish, some I don't know in English, and I was presenting from a different application, from my PowerPoint application, so I was not focusing on to the Zoom and Zoom chat. So sorry for anything over there, but. As I said, please be in touch, and thank you very much.